Black woman barred from her own jet, pilot instantly fired after learning the truth. The hushed opulence of the private jet terminal was a world apart, a sanctuary of silent wealth where expectations of privilege hung heavy in the air. Serena Hawthorne, a woman whose confidence was forged in the fires of ambition, entered this space not to seek validation, but to conduct business. Little did she know that within these exclusive walls, a relic of outdated prejudice, cloaked in a pilot's uniform, was about to ignite a battle for respect. Why, in this haven of luxury, was ignorance about to take center stage? The private jet terminal was a place of silent wealth, where billionaires moved with quiet authority and luxury was an unspoken expectation. Serena Hawthorne entered the space with the kind of effortless confidence that came not from inherited privilege, but from hard-earned success. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and wide-legged slacks, she carried herself with an air of quiet control, her natural curls framing a face that had seen and conquered countless obstacles. Serena wasn't here to prove anything. She had already proven it all, building a business empire that spanned continents, shattering ceilings, and opening doors for those who would come after her. But today, one man's ignorance was about to test her patience. As she approached the check-in counter, the receptionist, Elise Thompson, greeted her warmly, her polished professionalism intact. "Good morning, ma'am. May I assist you?" "Yes," Serena responded with calm assurance. "I'm here for the Hawthorne flight to Geneva." Elise's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen. "Of course, Miss Hawthorne. Everything is in order. Your jet is currently being prepped, and the captain will be with you shortly." Serena nodded in appreciation, stepping aside as she glanced at her watch. Timing was crucial. This wasn't just a luxury flight, it was a pivotal moment for her company. The Geneva meeting would solidify an international expansion deal, elevating her brand beyond its already elite status. She had worked for years to build this moment, and nothing, not even ignorance in a pilot's uniform, would get in her way. Moments later, Captain Ryan Holt approached, his presence cutting through the quiet hum of the terminal. Dressed in his crisp pilot's uniform, he had the stance of a man accustomed to being in charge. His gaze flickered over Serena, scanning her from head to toe, and in that instant, she knew exactly what was coming. "Miss Hawthorne?" His tone was polite barely, his hand extended, but his grip was brief, dismissive. "Yes," she answered, her voice even. Ryan's smirk was subtle, but unmistakable. "I must say, we don't usually see jet owners like you in this space." Serena's brow lifted slightly. "Like me?" Ryan shrugged, his tone carrying a thin veil of condescension. "No offense, but private jet ownership typically belongs to a certain demographic." There it was, the underestimation, the assumption, the quiet belief that she didn't belong. Serena had spent a lifetime navigating these moments, and she had no intention of letting this slide. She met his gaze with an unflinching stare. "Captain Holt, let me make one thing clear. I own this jet. Every rivet, every engine, every polished surface belongs to me, and I expect to be treated with the same respect as any other jet owner, or are you suggesting my success is up for debate?" Ryan's smirk faltered for a split second, but he recovered. "Of course not, Miss Hawthorne, just making an observation." Serena took a deliberate step closer, her voice dropping to a measured tone of warning. "Then observe this. I have zero tolerance for unprofessionalism. Get my jet ready, now." Ryan's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by a woman he had already written off. But he was about to learn that underestimation comes at a cost. And today, that price would be his career. The hum of the jet engines filled the cabin with a low, steady vibration as Serena Hawthorne settled into her seat, crossing one leg over the other with deliberate poise. She had handled men like Captain Ryan Holt before, men who mistook privilege for power and confidence for arrogance. But what Ryan had yet to realize was that his world was about to shrink. His casual prejudice had been ignored for too long. But today, Serena had the power and the will to hold him accountable. She sipped from a glass of still water, her mind already shifting gears toward the Geneva meeting. This was a historic deal. an opportunity that would cement her company's presence in the luxury European market. But instead of focusing on her expansion, she was handling ignorance at the gates of her own success. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to tolerate even a second of Ryan Holt's condescension. A faint commotion near the cockpit caught her attention. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Clara Reese, one of the flight attendants, hesitating near the galley. Clara was young, sharp, and efficient, but right now, she looked visibly uneasy. Serena lowered her glass and waited. It only took a few seconds before the young woman gathered the courage to step forward. "Miss Hawthorne?" Clara's voice was controlled, but Serena didn't miss the slight tremor beneath it. Serena turned, her expression unreadable. "Yes?" Clara glanced toward the cockpit, her lips pressing together in hesitation before she finally spoke. "Captain Holt would like to speak with you. Privately." Serena arched a single brow. The weight of her stare made Clara shift uncomfortably. "Would he?" Serena murmured, setting her glass down with precision. Clara nodded, looking almost apologetic. "Yes, ma'am. He said it's regarding the flight details." Serena studied her for a moment longer, then exhaled softly and stood. She adjusted her blazer and motioned for Clara to lead the way. The entire jet crew had witnessed Holt's earlier behavior, some watching with silent concern, others pretending not to notice. But now, as Serena made her way down the narrow aisle, they all felt the shift. This wasn't just a confrontation, this was a reckoning in motion. The cockpit door was open, and Ryan Holt stood just inside, arms crossed, his posture a mask of forced professionalism. "Captain," Serena greeted coolly as she stepped inside. Ryan exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening as he spoke. "Miss Hawthorne, I just wanted to clarify a few things before takeoff." Serena gave him a slow nod, her patience wearing thin. "Go on." Ryan glanced at his co-pilot, who wisely kept his gaze fixed on the control panel. Then, shifting his weight, Ryan leaned forward slightly. "I take pride in ensuring the integrity of every flight I command. That includes knowing exactly who my passengers are and verifying that everything is in order." Serena blinked. "You mean to say you still doubt my ownership of this jet?" Ryan hesitated. "I just find it unusual, people like you." "People like me?" Serena interrupted, her tone deceptively calm. Ryan's face colored, and he backpedaled. "You know what I mean, high-level corporate players, the kind that usually operate in this space. It's not common." Serena's lips curved, but there was no warmth in her smile. "Ah, so despite all the documentation, despite the fact that I signed off on this very aircraft, despite my team handling every logistical detail for this flight, you still feel the need to verify me." Ryan didn't answer right away, but his silence spoke volumes. Serena let the pause stretch, making him feel every second of it. Then she took a measured step forward, her presence commanding in the small cockpit. "Tell me, Captain Holt, what exactly were you hoping to find? A forged document? A mistake in my credentials? Or were you simply hoping to catch me in some sort of deception that confirmed your bias?" Ryan bristled. "No," she cut in smoothly. "You've had your turn to speak, now you'll listen." Ryan stiffened, his authority shrinking in the face of hers. "I didn't just buy this jet, Captain. I built the empire that allowed me to buy this jet. I didn't inherit it. I didn't stumble into it. I earned it. Every part of this aircraft, from the engines to the leather seats, exists under my name because of years of strategic growth, smart investments, and relentless work. And yet, here we are, having this conversation because you can't reconcile the fact that I don't fit your vision of wealth." Ryan's face darkened, but he didn't dare interrupt. Serena's voice remained calm, powerful. "I've been underestimated before, many times, by men like you, and do you know what always happens?" Ryan swallowed. "I win," Serena answered herself, her gaze unyielding. "I win because while you sit here doubting me, I surpass expectations, I outperform. I own spaces that people like you assume aren't for me." A tense silence settled in the cockpit. Ryan's co-pilot finally broke the stillness by clearing his throat. "Captain Holt," he said quietly, "air traffic control just signaled our clearance for takeoff." Ryan's eyes flickered, his internal battle playing out in real time. Then, with animosity barely contained, he straightened. Understood. Serena held his gaze for a beat longer before stepping back. Good, she murmured. Then do your job, Captain. And with that, she turned on her heel and exited the cockpit, leaving Ryan Holt to sit with the weight of his own failure. As she made her way back to her seat, the crew subtly avoided her gaze, but Serena knew they had all seen it. They had seen a powerful woman stand firm against a man who had thought himself untouchable. And somewhere, deep in the marrow of his ego, Ryan Holt knew his career had just changed forever. The air inside the cabin was thick with unspoken tension as Serena Hawthorne settled back into her seat. The confrontation with Captain Ryan Holt still buzzed in her mind, but she wouldn't let it cloud her focus. She had won that battle, but the war wasn't over yet. She had no intention of letting Holt walk away from this unscathed, not when his prejudice had nearly derailed her flight. She picked up her tablet, flipping through the details of her upcoming meeting in Geneva, but her focus wavered. Serena was a woman who handled setbacks with precision, but today wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, and questioned simply because they didn't fit a narrow mold of power and success. Across the cabin, Clara Reese, the young flight attendant, who had been subtly watching the situation unfold, hesitated before stepping closer. She held a tray with a fresh glass of water, though Serena could tell that wasn't the real reason she had approached. Miss Hawthorne, Clara began softly, her voice careful. Serena looked up, her expression calm but expectant. Yes? Clara glanced toward the cockpit for a brief second before lowering her voice. I just wanted to say that what happened earlier was, well, it wasn't right, she swallowed. Captain Holt shouldn't have treated you like that. Serena studied her for a moment, sensing the sincerity in her words. I appreciate you saying that, Clara. She gestured toward the seat across from her. Sit. Clara hesitated, then gingerly took a seat, placing the tray down. She fidgeted with the hem of her uniform before speaking again. It's not my place to question him, she admitted, but I've seen it before. Not just with you, the way he acts around certain passengers. If they don't look like the usual clientele, he gets difficult. Serena's jaw tightened. Has anyone ever reported him? Clara shook her head quickly. Not officially. He's been flying with Elite Aviation for years. People let things slide because he's good at his job. She sighed, then added bitterly, at least that's what they say. Serena leaned forward slightly. And what do you say? Clara met her gaze, something steely in her young eyes. I say being a good pilot doesn't excuse being a terrible person. Serena let out a small hum of approval. I couldn't agree more. Clara exhaled as if relieved to be heard. If you do decide to report him, I wanted you to know that you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. Serena nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Thank you, Clara. That means more than you know. The attendant gave her a quick, grateful smile before standing. If you need anything, just let me know. As she walked away, Serena felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her. If Holt had been allowed to act this way for years, how many others had been forced to endure his silent contempt? Her mind shifted gears. Holt's attitude was a symptom of a larger problem, and Serena was never one to let a problem go unaddressed. She picked up her phone and sent a quick message to Leonard Hayes, her most trusted business partner. Need you to pull up everything you can on Elite Aviation's policies regarding pilot conduct and customer complaints. Leonard's reply was almost immediate. That bad? Worse. Leonard didn't ask any more questions. He simply replied, Give me 30 minutes. Satisfied, Serena set her phone down. If Elite Aviation thought they could ignore this, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. A low chime interrupted her thoughts, the sound of the cabin intercom activating. Holt's voice came through, carefully measured but laced with forced professionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now cruising at 40,000 feet. Estimated arrival time in Geneva is 6 hours and 25 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Serena scoffed, the nerve, as if nothing had happened. She closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. Holt's career was hanging by a thread, and he didn't even know it yet. Good. By the time this flight landed, he was going to realize just how much power he had underestimated. The quiet hum of the engines provided a steady backdrop as Serena Hawthorne sat near the window, the clouds rolling by beneath her like an endless sea. She tapped her fingers rhythmically against the armrest, her mind still replaying the events of the morning. The audacity of Captain Holt, his condescending remarks, his refusal to acknowledge her authority, it wasn't new to her. Men like him existed in every industry, clinging to their outdated assumptions, blind to the fact that the world was changing around them. But Serena wasn't the type to let things slide, especially not when it came to her own aircraft. Her phone buzzed against the polished wood of the table beside her. She glanced at the screen. Leonard Hayes. She answered immediately, keeping her voice steady. Tell me you have something. Leonard didn't waste time. Oh, I have more than something. His voice was edged with quiet satisfaction. Elite Aviation has a strict no-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. But get this, there have been at least 3 prior complaints against Holt, all from high-profile clients, and all conveniently buried. Serena's eyes darkened. Who buried them? My guess? Someone in upper management protecting him. He's been flying for them for nearly 15 years. Probably has a few friends in the right places. Leonard sighed. But here's where it gets interesting. One of the complaints came from an executive at a Fortune 500 company. She had issues with Holt questioning her identity when she boarded her own flight. Sound familiar? Serena exhaled slowly. Too familiar. Leonard continued, from what I can gather, every complaint hit a dead end. No follow-ups, no action taken. They either refunded the clients or reassigned Holt to different routes until the heat died down. Serena shook her head. So he's been doing this for years, unchecked. Exactly, Leonard confirmed, which means if you push this, they won't be able to ignore it. The evidence is there, the pattern is there, and if you want to take it public. He trailed off, letting the implication hang. Serena considered this. She had the power to expose Holt on a much larger scale if she wanted to. One statement, one well-placed call to the right journalist, and his career would be in shambles. But Serena wasn't impulsive. She played the long game. Right now, her priority was making sure Elite Aviation couldn't sweep this under the rug again. I don't need to go public, she finally said, her voice measured. Not yet, but I do need to make sure he faces real consequences this time. Leonard let out a low chuckle. Something tells me he's about to have the worst landing of his career. Serena smirked. Let's make sure of it. As she ended the call, she turned her gaze toward the cockpit door. She had spent her entire career proving people like Holt wrong. But this wasn't just about proving a point. It was about setting a precedent. The sound of footsteps approaching made her glance up. Clara, the flight attendant, stood hesitantly near her seat, clutching a small notepad. Miss Hawthorne, she said softly, Captain Holt is requesting to speak with you. Serena arched an eyebrow. Is that so? Clara nodded quickly, looking nervous. I think he's trying to smooth things over. Serena sighed, setting her tablet aside. Let's see what he has to say. She rose gracefully, following Clara toward the cockpit door. The moment it opened, Holt turned, his expression carefully neutral, but his stance still rigid, with barely disguised discomfort. Miss Hawthorne, he said, his voice clipped but polite. I wanted to personally apologize for any misunderstandings earlier. Serena tilted her head slightly, studying him. Misunderstandings? Holt's jaw tensed, as if forcing himself to continue. I may have misjudged the situation. Serena crossed her arms unamused. You mean you misjudged me? Holt hesitated. I didn't mean any offense. She cut him off. But you did offend, and let's not pretend you weren't aware of it. His nostrils flared slightly, but he nodded stiffly. I assure you it won't happen again. Serena leaned in just slightly, her voice unwavering. Oh, I know it won't. Because after we land, I'll be having a very detailed conversation with Elite Aviation about your record. Holt's mask cracked for a split second. his eyes flashing with something dangerously close to panic. Serena continued, her voice silk and steel. 3 prior complaints, Captain. 3 times you've been allowed to walk away without consequences. That ends today. Holt's hands clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. She straightened. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a flight to enjoy. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked back to her seat, already drafting the email in her mind that would ensure Holt's fate was sealed. By the time this jet landed, his career, like his arrogance, would be crashing down around him. Serena Hawthorne sat in the elegant interior of her private jet, her fingers lightly tapping against the polished armrest. The confrontation with Captain Holt was over, but the weight of the moment still lingered. The quiet hum of the aircraft surrounded her, yet her mind was anything but still. For years, she had faced men like Holt, men who believed power belonged to them alone, men who couldn't fathom the idea of a black woman at the helm of her own empire, let alone owning the very aircraft they were hired to operate. But Serena had never been one to shrink in the face of arrogance. Across from her, Marcus, the young flight attendant who had witnessed the entire ordeal, approached hesitantly, a tray of refreshments in hand. His usually composed demeanor was a little shaken, his eyes darting toward the cockpit where Holt had retreated in disgrace. "Miss Hawthorne," Marcus said, carefully setting down a glass of water and a plate of fresh fruit. "If there's anything else I can do for you, please let me know." Serena gave him a small but reassuring smile. "Thank you, Marcus. You've been professional through all of this. I appreciate it." He nodded, seeming relieved by her acknowledgement. He had seen the power struggle unfold, had likely felt the second-hand embarrassment of watching a superior dismantled by nothing more than the truth and the sheer force of Serena's presence. As Marcus turned to leave, Serena's phone vibrated against the tabletop. Leonard Hayes, her closest confidant, and the man who had made sure Elite Aviation was already feeling the fire. She picked up. "Tell me it's done," she said, skipping pleasantries. Leonard chuckled on the other end. "You never waste time, do you?" "I don't have the luxury." There was a pause, then Leonard's tone turned serious. "Holt's contract is being reviewed as we speak. His superiors are furious, not just about what he did, but about the pattern of behavior that's been ignored for too long." Serena exhaled slowly, nodding to herself. "Good, and his past complaints?" "Being reopened," Leonard confirmed. "You weren't the first, Serena, but I think you'll be the last." A satisfaction settled deep in her chest, not just for herself, but for the others before her who had been dismissed, ignored, treated as if their experiences weren't valid. Holt had relied on the silence of the system to protect him. But silence had never been Serena's language. She glanced at her watch. 30 minutes until landing. 30 minutes until she stepped into the Geneva boardroom where an international deal 1 year in the making awaited her. "Leonard, make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug," she said. "I don't want a slap on the wrist. I want a precedent set." Leonard sighed. "You know I'll see it through." She did, that's why she trusted him. "One last thing," Leonard added. "Did Holt say anything after you put him in his place?" Serena smirked, recalling the way Holt's face had drained of color, how his arrogance had crumbled under the sheer weight of his own accountability. He said, "This isn't over." Leonard laughed, full and rich. "Oh, it's over for him, all right. He just doesn't know it yet." A knock at the cabin door interrupted them. Serena ended the call just as the co-pilot, James Holloway, stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hawthorne," he greeted. "I just wanted to personally apologize for the events earlier. I should have intervened sooner." Serena studied him, noting the sincerity in his voice. Unlike Holt, James hadn't been hostile, but he had been silent. "And why didn't you?" she asked, her tone measured. James hesitated, then sighed. "Truthfully, I didn't think it was my place." Serena raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think calling out discrimination was your place?" His shoulders tensed. "I see now that I should have spoken up." She tilted her head, watching him carefully. "And will you next time?" James held her gaze, then nodded firmly. "Yes, ma'am, I will." Serena let the silence stretch, then finally nodded in return. Good, because silence is compliance, James, and I don't need compliance, I need accountability. James exhaled, seeming relieved. Understood, Miss Hawthorne. As he left the cabin, Serena turned back to her window. The Swiss mountains were visible in the distance now, the jagged peaks cutting through the sky like sentinels. Her thoughts drifted to Holt again, not as a man, but as a symbol. He had thought his authority was absolute, that his uniform granted him power over those he deemed unworthy. He had learned today that true power doesn't lie in titles or in perceptions. It lies in those who refuse to be diminished. Serena reached for her phone one last time and typed out a message to Leonard. I don't think Holt will be getting another cockpit anytime soon. Not unless he plans on flying economy. Serena chuckled to herself as the plane began its descent. The world was changing, and if men like Holt refused to adapt, then they'd simply be left behind. The conference room at Geneva's Grand Summit Tower was silent, yet charged with tension. Serena Hawthorne sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The European investors, each seated in their designated spots, exchanged quick glances, some eager, others skeptical. They had expected a businessman in a tailored suit, a middle-aged industry veteran with a deep voice and graying temples. Instead, they got her. Serena was unbothered by their assumptions, having shattered expectations her entire career. Dressed in a sleek white suit that contrasted beautifully against her warm brown skin, she radiated unapologetic authority. Across from her sat Bernard Rocher, the French financier who had spent the last 20 minutes questioning everything about her proposal, her numbers, her leadership, her experience. Serena had seen this play before, the subtle condescension, the veiled disbelief, the unspoken challenge behind every question. She let them talk, she let them assume, and now it was her turn. She leaned forward slightly, her voice even, controlled. Mr. Rocher, it seems spent a great deal of time questioning whether I belong at this table, so before we continue, let me settle this once and for all. The room went still. She tapped the tablet in front of her, sending a projection to the screen at the far end of the room. Instantly, a graph appeared, one that showed her company's trajectory against its European competitors, a dominant upward curve, while theirs barely shifted. The shift in the investors' expressions was immediate. This is a 5-year revenue breakdown, she continued, her voice crisp, unwavering. As you can see, my company has outpaced the projected growth of 3 of the firms currently sitting on this board, and yet I'm the one whose expertise is in question. A few of the investors shifted uncomfortably. Bernard, however, held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Forgive me, Miss Hawthorne, he said after a moment, his tone measured. It's not personal. We simply have to be sure this partnership is beneficial for all involved. Serena's lips curved slightly. Oh, I assure you, Mr. Rocher, it's far more beneficial to you than it is to me. The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing against the room like an invisible force. She clicked again, pulling up a slide showing her company's market valuation, a figure that surpassed expectations. You see, I don't need this deal. My company is already thriving. My expansion will happen with or without your investment. The only question is whether you want a piece of it. And then a slow clap. All eyes turned to Elena Vasquez, the Spanish CEO whose company had been watching Serena's growth closely. Unlike the others, she wasn't threatened. She was impressed. Well said, Elena remarked, a small smirk playing at her lips. I think we've wasted enough time on doubts. Let's talk numbers. Serena didn't miss the way the others immediately adjusted their postures, as if scrambling to shift the tone of the conversation. The power had just changed hands. She hid her satisfaction well, but internally, she reveled in it. This had never been a battle over finances. It was about perception. They had underestimated her, assumed her success was an anomaly, rather than the product of hard work, strategy, and resilience. They had tried to place barriers in her way, but she had turned them into stepping stones. Serena took a slow sip of water before setting the glass down, her gaze sweeping across the table. I believe we can proceed, she said smoothly, reclaiming control with the ease of a woman who had never truly lost it. Bernard cleared his throat, nodding stiffly. Yes, let's proceed. Serena smiled. They always fall in line eventually. The Geneva deal was secured, the contracts signed, the handshakes exchanged. Serena Hawthorne had done what she always did, turned skepticism into opportunity, doubt into profit. But as the celebration dinner wrapped up and she made her way back to the hotel, her mind was already elsewhere. The email notification on her phone had confirmed what she suspected. Captain Ryan Holt was no longer employed with Elite Aviation. The final decision had come swiftly, just as she had intended. Serena knew that her confrontation with Holt at the private terminal had sent shockwaves through the industry. She had received 3 separate calls from executives within aviation companies, subtly apologizing for what had transpired, while also ensuring her that steps were being taken to prevent similar incidents in the future. But she wasn't just here to accept an apology. She was here to set a standard. Her jet was ready for departure by morning. As she stepped onto the tarmac, the first thing she noticed was a new captain waiting near the stairs. A tall man, mid-50s, his posture professional, his expression neutral. He gave her a respectful nod the moment she approached. Miss Hawthorne, he said, his voice even. I'm Captain Reeves. I'll be your pilot today. It's an honor to serve you. Serena studied him for a moment. Respect. It wasn't performative, it wasn't forced. It was what professionalism was supposed to look like. She nodded. Thank you, Captain Reeves. I appreciate that. Behind her, she heard the sound of hurried footsteps. She turned, her brows lifting slightly when she saw Ryan Holt, dressed in civilian clothes, approaching with a strained expression. Serena said nothing as he reached her, his breath uneven, his confidence from before now entirely absent. Miss Hawthorne, he started, his tone carefully measured. I just wanted to say. She raised a hand, cutting him off before he could even begin. Don't, she said simply. Holt froze. Serena stepped forward, keeping her voice calm but firm. Whatever you came here to say, whatever excuse or justification you've come up with, it doesn't matter. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences. His jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. I wasn't trying to be racist. Serena tilted her head, amused. You weren't trying to be, but you were. That's the thing about prejudice, Captain. It doesn't need intent. It thrives in assumptions, in dismissiveness, in the belief that someone like me couldn't possibly own the very jet you were hired to fly. Holt had no response to that. Serena could see the weight of reality settling onto his shoulders. Finally, he swallowed hard. I just wanted to apologize. She studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Then do better. And with that, she turned and boarded her jet. The moment the doors closed behind her, she let out a slow exhale. This battle was over. But the war? She was just getting started.